Sea of Thieves. Wherever it is Xbox's most successful IP this generation, the game was an immense hit since its launch, attracting upwards of 40 million total players by April 2024. However, beneath the alluring waves and sun-drenched islands lurked an unexpected threat to the game's success: its own community. From controversial updates that would leave portions of the player base enraged and an ever-increasing skill ceiling, to long periods of delays and content droughts, Sea of Thieves has had more than its fair share of hardship. And yet amidst all this chaos, the game managed to recover incredibly well, to the point where Sea of Thieves has never been as good as it is now. But to understand just how Rare managed to sustain their success where so many other live service games failed, we have to go back, all the way to January 2018. Even before the game was released, Sea of Thieves was received very well by the public. YouTubers and streamers all over were dipping their toes in the beta of the game, with videos easily surpassing hundreds of thousands of views. The game was trending before even being released. And that being said, on March 21st, 2018, the game was rolled out for all to enjoy. Initially, there wasn't that much to do in the world beyond voyages for the 3 trading companies in the game, but people weren't excited about that. No. What gave Sea of Thieves such a boost in hype both before and after release was something else: the true pirate experience, PvP. If you've ever sat down and watched a good pirate movie, you know very well that the most exciting moments in the movie aren't digging up some gold-laden treasure, it's the action-packed battles. It's this very concept that brought such success to Sea of Thieves. People don't want to play a RuneScape reskin, they want the old reliable pirate versus pirate combat. And give them that, Rare did. People would rush the servers in a frenzy to lay siege on other ships in one of the most entertaining and fast-paced combat styles pirate games have ever seen. One thing was certain: a PvP-centric community was forming in the heart of Sea of Thieves. Rare knew this, and so to cater to the masses, they would release update after update focused on encouraging interactions between crews, in both good and bad senses. Updates like the Hungering Deep and Skeleton Thrones brought crews together to earn rewards, while the introduction of world events such as Skeleton Forts gave people the option to fight over loot. It would also be around this time that the concept of tucking was flowing into the meta. For those unfamiliar, tucking is when you stow away on another crew's ship, waiting until they bring loot, when you then steal it and flee. People really only did it for trolling and just to get a jump on people and use the element of surprise to their advantage. Hey, wait, there's a tucker right there! As we approached the end of Sea of Thieves' first year, we were treated to a few more notable updates. We got a map expansion with the Devil's Roar, a region that even to this day is widely considered pointless to traverse, a special flag called the Reaper's Mark, which would broadcast your position on the map for all other crews, the official PvP flag, if you will. Although kids to this day still misuse it because it looks cool. But also cursed cannonballs were added, which would rarely appear around the world. They brought an edge to combat, with every cannonball having a unique effect. You could immediately drop a ship's anchor, or make them all dance with a single well-placed shot. As you could imagine, they were devastating when used correctly. And it's this time that we also encountered our first backlash from the community. As I mentioned, these cannonballs would randomly appear in barrels around the world, which means that if you happened to come across some while your opponent didn't, you had a significant advantage in combat. It introduced luck to a game where skill-based PvP had been put on a pedestal for so long. And although people were complaining about this implementation, Rare did nothing. Come April 29th, 2019, Sea of Thieves' first anniversary update would be released, and this thing was packed with content. It removed the doubt from any player's mind that the game would be falling off anytime soon. We were treated to a new trading company, the Hunter's Call. Oriented all around catching and cooking fish, it was released alongside the fishing mechanic, which also sneakily introduced better foods into the game via cooked meat and new fruit types. 9 Tall Tales were added, which were story-driven quests that sent you on the adventure to construct the Shroudbreaker, a magic relic that allowed you to reach the shores of gold, a place only of legends. Ships were now all outfitted with harpoons, allowing for much more powerful maneuverability of your beloved vessel. Ship damage was expanded upon, with a capstan, wheel, and masts now being able to break after taking enough hits. This change was primarily introduced to counter the problem with cursed cannonballs, since breaking the masts allowed all players to halt the mobility of their opponent. And of course, best for last, the Arena, a brand new game mode where 5 crews of players would go head-to-head in intense combat and loot hauling for a full 24 minutes to see who ends up on top. Although you might not see it at first, every single one of these new additions also catered to the PvP community. Of course, Arena and ship damage expansions, but also principles like Overheal, which allow players to heal faster after taking damage, and better healing sources in general. Harpoons allow players to perform rapid maneuvers like death spirals easier, and snatch players and loot off of the decks of enemy ships. Even the Tall Tales influence PvP, with the ability to run from enemy ships by activating the Shroudbreaker becoming an extremely meta and annoying concept that is still used by players today. The Anniversary Update did everything right. It satisfied both PvP and non-PvP communities at the same time. And with Arena blowing up and the player count skyrocketing, the PvP community started gravitating towards this new game mode, leaving the regular adventure mode for players who didn't want to engage in PvP, preventing the discouragement of new players. Sea of Thieves' first Anniversary Update is still widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest update that Rare has ever released for the game. Fast forward to September 11th, 2019. No, I'm not kidding. Look it up. These guys dropped an update on 9/11. And ironically enough, it would be the update that started the decline of the game and ruined it forever. You see, this update introduced the Pirate Emporium, home to all of the microtransactions that the game would feature for years to come. Of course, the game had its unique currency in the form of ancient coins, which players would obtain by either killing the rare ancient skeletons that had a very small chance of spawning, or buying them off of the Microsoft Store or Steam Marketplace. Now, the Emporium would sell only cosmetics, so at least they didn't pull a supercell and make the game pay to win in any form. But it would still lead to a sudden shift of resources being pooled towards adding new content to the Pirate Emporium. And although this shift was minor, that was only for the time being. A little over a month later, the Fort of the Damned was released. Previously known as Old Boot Fort, the island was promptly cloaked in a dark mist, with various parts of the fort taking up a much more haunted and eerie style. What set the Fort of the Damned apart from other world events was that it had to be manually activated via a special ritual. This means that unlike other world events, the Fort of the Damned was guaranteed to have at least one other crew present, and a boatload of loot, no doubt. As you can imagine, the Fort of the Damned became a magnet for avid PvPers and Tuckers, and is probably still one of the most contested activities in the game. About 5 months later, the player base would be treated to yet another set of features that would forever impact the PvP meta. People were still complaining about the advantage that Cursed Cannonballs brought, since you needed to hit 3 shots on all masts to stop the ship entirely, while a single anchor ball would suffice. In the case for something like a galleon, with 3 masts, this was rendered near impossible, especially considering the fact that you could repair your mast even after a single hit. And so Rare would introduce 2 new key items into the game's arsenal. The Chain Shot, which would instantly break the mast wheel and capstan with a single impact, and the Blunder Bomb, a powerful knockback grenade perfect for launching enemies off of their deck. Firebombs had also been added 4 months prior, which would set their target ablaze upon impact. Players would be forced to deal with the fire by bailing on it before it became an uncontrollable disaster. And intended fire could be devastating for large ships like galleons.
Chill!
There was a misinput, calm down! You calm the fuck down! There was a misinput!
Additionally, both firebombs and blunderbombs could be thrown, changing aspects of close quarters combat as well. A direct blunderbomb to the face would shave off half your health in a single blow. A month after Heart of Fire released, Sea of Thieves' second Anniversary Update was dropped, and this one had a lot to live up to. Titled Ships of Fortune, the update introduced the beloved Emissaries system, a risk-reward mechanic that allowed you to earn significantly more money for loot you turned in, while incentivizing other crews to sink you even more. The system worked like this. You pledged to a trading company and raised a flag on your ship. As you hoarded more and more loot associated to that trading company, so chests for the gold hoarders for instance, you would earn higher and higher grades. Every grade slapped on a multiplier when you cashed that loot in. At grade 5, the highest possible, you earned a 150% bonus on all loot for that company. That's 2.5 times the money and reputation. But, like always, there's a catch. Not only can other ships see you representing a company, meaning you have a lot of loot on board, but sinking your ship would lead to you dropping your emissary flag as a physical item. This flag then could be cashed in at the new trading company, the Reaper's Bones. Over the past 5 months, what was once an uncharted island had been slowly but surely built into a bastion of piracy. Now it was finally complete. The Reaper's hideout stood proudly at the center of the map, and at the time was the only place in the game you could hand in broken emissary flags. And since it's a trading company, it too had an emissary. So if you reached grade 5 Reapers and cashed in a flag, it could easily be worth upwards of 100,000 gold. But since the Reaper's Bones was a PvP faction, the emissary system worked a little differently in this case. For starters, all loot was counted towards the grade. This means that literally any activity in the game could be significantly more profitable when running a Reaper's Emissary. So to combat this, the Reaper's Emissary functions similarly to the Reaper's Mark. Representing the company would publicly broadcast your position and emissary grade on the map for all crews to see. And since the Reaper's hideout is the only place you can cash in loot and get the multiplier, crews knew exactly where you were going to go. This update also brought some changes to Arena, with the time per match being reduced from 24 minutes to 15, and chests being completely reworked. Now, there was only one chest you had to fight over and only one place to drop it off. This made it so that crews would fight over the loot, rather than just bum rushing chests non-stop. And it also brought one of the most game-changing mechanics to the game: reviving. Before this update, if you were dead, that was that. You had to do your time in the Fury of the Damned and smack talk the other crew that was also dead there with you, before being able to return to the mortal plane. But now it was different. Communication and teamwork became that much more valuable among the crew, since a single person can actually manage to revive 2 people before the time runs out. Therefore, you can revive a single person and have the both of you revive the remaining 2. Now, of course, when you were revived, you came back with significantly reduced health, but nothing a few bananas couldn't cover. This mechanic brought significantly more value to the flex, or border, on a crew, since they could spawn camp the crew while the remaining members dealt heavy damage to the ship. Fast forward 2 months and wait, who's that big floating head guy? Oh, that's Captain Flameheart. Captain who? He's been the antagonist to the game this whole time? Aren't you caught up on the lore? No, I'm not. Disgraceful. Haunted Shores introduced one of the most annoying world events to the game. Not because it was hard, not because it was heavily contested, not because the loot was bad, but because of this guy. You had to battle your way through 3 waves of ghost ships, but throughout the entire time you'd be doing the event, Mr. Bobblehead over here would be shouting at you. But the other reason why this event was so bad was because of the rewards. They were good. Too good, in fact. Upon beating the final boss, the Burning Blade, you'd be rewarded a Spectral Cannon Crate with 3 new cannonball types: the Phantom Cannonball, the Flame Cannonball, and the Wraith Cannonball. The first 2 are almost identical. The Phantom Cannonball behaves like a normal cannonball, except it's less affected by gravity and passes through the ship, creating 2 holes instead of 1. The Flame Cannonball behaves similarly, but also creates a large fire instead of holes. Where the problem arises is with the Wraith Cannonball. The Wraithball would have similar mechanics as the other 2, but upon impact it would create a massive explosion almost equal to that of a gunpowder barrel. It was particularly devastating because of a bug that wasn't patched out of the game for years, where if timed correctly you could launch a ship in the air and flip it, resulting in it instantly sinking. Rare had essentially created another cursed cannonball situation, but even more devastating. As people complained, the development team once again decided to do nothing about it. Come January 28th, 2021, we'd be treated to Sea of Thieves' 3rd anniversary update, a little over 3 months sooner than what they normally do, but I'm not complaining. You see, this one was called Season 1, since Rare decided to hop on the season bandwagon. The game had featured a season pass with free rewards as well as bonus rewards you could buy for $10. It was such a scam too, because the paid rewards were solely cosmetics, which, as we would later learn, would come back to the Emporium. There was no FOMO here. The free pass cosmetics would not be reintroduced, however, so as long as you played back then, you'd be rewarded. It's similar to how the game had worked before: special events that awarded you with cosmetics that would no longer be obtainable. A perfect way to show off your accomplishments. In a way, I'm glad for this, since games using FOMO to prey on their players is an extremely overused tactic. And speaking of updates, this one would introduce the most controversial cosmetic to date: the Dark Adventurer sails. Many sails in the game have cutouts to add to the detail. For instance, the Kraken sails have these rips at the bottom. The DA sails were essentially this detail, but on steroids. They had a triangular cutout at the bottom that provided more visibility when steering the ship, especially on brigantines and galleons. It seems the developers knew this, explaining why they remain as the most expensive cosmetic in the game to this day, valued at 8.2 million gold, and requiring Pirate Legend status to even access the shop. They quickly became a symbol of danger on the seas. If you saw anyone rocking these sails, it'd be wise to steer clear of them. It sparked up a lot of complaints from the player base, since Rare had essentially implemented a form of progression into the game. Sea of Thieves had always been applauded for being solely skill-based, and although things like cursed cannonballs would give you an advantage in combat, it was something accessible to all players. You just had to seek them out. By implementing an advantageous cosmetic that was incredibly expensive and required you to grind the game to become a Pirate Legend, it gave more seasoned players an edge in combat, even if they were pitted against more skilled opponents. Of course, people would complain about this unfair implementation, and the problem was ignored by the team, just like with the cursed cannonballs and Wraithballs. It's also notable to mention that this update was one of the first to drip feed content, with parts of the update being rolled out monthly rather than one big update at once. This spread of content allowed for the game to retain hype for longer, and stopped the player count from dropping midway through the season as much. 3 months later, Season 1 would come to a close, with Season 2 taking its place. The season system was proving to be beneficial for both the game and the player base. Rare would be earning more money from the boosted amount of microtransactions, and players would encounter more active servers with a rise in people playing consistently. On top of that, the season had a counter displaying when it would end, giving players a good idea of when the next major update would be released. When Season 2 rolled around, the game added a new variant of Skeleton Fort world event, the Fort of Fortune. The original Skeleton Fort event paled in comparison loot-wise to the events that had been added since. The Fort of Fortune took what was a normal fort event and scaled it up in difficulty significantly. But of course, the reward also reflected this. It became the most profitable event in the game, which also means it was the most contested. Rare had managed to bring back that nostalgia from launch, where people would rush skeleton forts and battle over the loot. The game also hosted an event called Reapers vs. the World, where players would be rewarded for sinking emissary ships. It would appear that the PvP community was back in high spirits, with most of the community forgiving Rare about the Dark Adventurer sales. As time progressed and gold became more inflated, especially thanks to the new trade route system, more and more crews had unlocked them to the point where you couldn't call yourself a PvP sweat without owning the sales. Now, I have to confess something. I actually didn't play Sea of Thieves from launch. I had been closely following the game since beta, and even pre-ordered the game at some point, but the fact is my computer lacked the processing power to run the game well. And it would only be around Season 2 when I actually joined in on the fun because I got a strong enough PC. But unlike most of the other players coming into the game at the time, I had an advantage. As I mentioned before, Sea of Thieves prides itself in skill-based growth and combat. And because I had been following the game since closed beta, I basically knew all the ins and outs, all the gimmicks, all the mechanics. Now, I just needed to develop muscle memory. This is how I managed to shock people into thinking I had thousands of hours in the game when I only had like 200. And looking back at everything, I'm glad I joined the game when I did. Of course, I would have preferred to join sooner, but had I waited maybe 7 more months before finally joining, I would have probably dropped the game much faster. Season 3 was an anomaly. It brought very little content into the game, and yet led to the biggest gain of players since launch. That was because a few weeks before the release, Rare had announced that they were collaborating with Disney to bring Jack Sparrow and the Pirates of the Caribbean world to Sea of Thieves, which of course brought even more attention and players to the game. Rare released 5 new Tall Tales, a slew of new enemies to encounter emergently on islands, and a new weapon, the Trident of Dark Tides. At release, there were already problems visible. The amount of enemies spawning on islands had been scaled up a lot, to the point where after killing a wave, another would immediately spawn, and then yet another. Before Season 3, you had at least a minute to breathe before more enemies would emerge, but not anymore. What could have been a nice addition of variety to the game became a nuisance to deal with. The Tall Tales were very well executed, but only bolstered a few hours of content. Most players 100% of them in a single weekend. Half of the Tall Tales took place in the Sea of the Damned, a magical place only accessible by activating a portal at outposts. It transferred you to a separate server for only your crew to complete the story before sending you back to a public server. The problem was that any resources you brought with you from one world to another transferred, so you could portal hop from one server to another fully kitted for battle. People would do this for years, searching for Forts of the Damned or Alliance servers to lay waste on. This became more of a mechanic than a bug, and since anyone had access to it, it wasn't that much of an issue. People simply accepted it. And that was, unfortunately, all the content released in Season 3, so people had to wait 3 months for any new content. After 3 years, the game finally received another map expansion in Season 4. Now, in my opinion, making the world bigger is a problem, since Rare had openly stated that they can't handle more than 6 crews on a single server, and by expanding the world, it would make it even harder to encounter another ship. However, this expansion actually considered this issue and expanded downward instead. It added shrines to the game, sunken ancient ruins loaded with brand new coral loot. There was a risk-reward situation here, however. You had to leave your ship up top, unattended, while you dove down to raid the shrine. And the longer you took down there, the greater the chance of another crew sinking your undefended vessel. It brought a whole new level of stress and fear to the game, especially if you were a solo player. Season 5 was the 4th anniversary update of the game, and looking back, it was one of the most underwhelming ones ever. It was a clear sign that something was wrong at Rare headquarters. After waiting 3 months, we received a few scraps of content. You had rowboats with cannons on them, which were RNG encounters around the world and bolstered more knockback than the midget from Pirates of the Caribbean. The ability to bury your treasure, but if another ship sank you, you can't go back and dig it up since they get the maps, running the feature next to pointless. And fireworks. Wow, fireworks. Can you shoot them at ships? Yes. What do? Flashbang you.
How's it going, everyone? Flashbang here.
It sounds like an interesting concept, but the truth is it's such a niche item because the chance of you shooting a firework and having it explode before hitting the ship, but still being in the vicinity of flashbanging the enemy is so rare you'll probably only find like 3 clips of it on YouTube. So no one really bothered with it. And that's all we got for the next 3 months. As you can guess, both the PvP and PvE communities were really pissed about this update, and things were about to get worse. On January 26th, 2022, Joe Neate, the executive producer of the game, would release an announcement detailing the shutting down of Arena. Almost 3 years ago, the beloved game mode had been released, and it had gained a cult following. It was understood by the whole game that owning the triumphant Sea Dog cosmetics, those awarded only to the best the Arena had to offer, was a sign of skill and dedication to the game's combat. And with the game mode nearing its end, these prestigious titles and items would become even more valuable and sought after. It's no secret that the Arena was home to some of the most skilled, but also toxic players that the game had to offer. So bad, in fact, the game had disabled voice chat and text communication among other crews in the game mode altogether, reducing you to only using quick messages and gestures. But the player base didn't care, and soon enough people would be bucketing your lifeless corpse, spamming rolls on deck laughing whenever they got a kill. When I first entered the Arena setting, I was extremely discouraged from playing it like many others. In fact, only about 2% of the player base ever touched the game mode before the decision to shut it down. But I persisted, and Arena was what allowed me to learn from my mistakes and develop the muscle memory and skills I needed to climb the ranks. Some of the best times I ever had were spent in this competitive game mode. And in a game that took its pride in its revolutionary combat mechanics, it felt strange to see the PvP game mode shutting down. Rare was optimistic that this would only lead to people dedicating more time to the base game, but they were not ready for what happened next. On March 10th, 2022, the Arena closed its doors forever. Loyal PvPers rushed to the base adventure game mode, leading to a month-long period where those not as skilled in combat found the game next to unplayable. Veterans would hunt down ships on the whole server just for the fight, ignoring the loot altogether. But even they soon became bored. As the weeks passed, both PvE and PvP players began to leave the game, causing the player count to take quite a blow. But this isn't the last we'll hear of the Arena veterans. They'll be back sooner than you think. Beyond the closure Arena, Season 6 also greatly committed to drip-feeding the content, as they did in seasons before. They also introduced 2 new fields of content: adventures, which were story-driven quests that would only last 2 weeks before being gone forever. These adventures would have real-time impacts on the world, however. For instance, a period of time, Golden Sands Outpost was shrouded in a cursed fog, making it impossible to spawn there. Or ghostly illusions of Spanish forts came to fruition. Remember when I said I was proud that Rare wasn't weaponizing FOMO? Yeah, well, I take all of that back, because this wasn't about cosmetics, it was about gameplay. People were in an uproar because there was no way to replay the content. The public wanted some way to go back and replay the adventures, even if they missed out on them. At least with updates, the content added was permanent for the most part, so you only missed out on cosmetics. The second field was mysteries. These were puzzles that the entire community had to come together to solve. To date, there have only been 2 mysteries, with both of them being very underwhelming. The first involved a murder mystery, where the actual killer had no association or probable cause, and the second one was a bunch of cryptic messages that sent you with a letter that basically said nothing. Season 6 also brought the introduction of sea forts, Spanish emplacements scattered around the world that function as your own personal base. They were amazing. Outfitted with a kitchen, sleeping quarters, and barrels chock full of resources, visiting a sea fort for supplies when starting your session quickly became a must. And now that everyone had next to infinite supplies, slowly whittling down the enemy was no longer a viable option. Using a blitzkrieg strategy was the new norm, where you would rapidly board the ship and spawn camp them until the ship sank. The meta did a full 180, and suddenly cannoneers became less valuable than boarders again. Season 7 was pushed back 2 months due to unknown complications. But way before it was released, people already knew what the update was about. You see, parts of the content were leaked through visual bugs, where crests would appear on the backs of ships when viewed from far enough distance. And sure enough, as we would see, Season 7 was the Captaincy update. Captaincy allowed you to own your own ship, name it, and decorate it even more than before, with trinkets you unlock as you play. It's this very update that brought me to spend 1,000 minutes sleeping in a bed in-game just so anyone who sunk my ship could see it. The problem was that for a brief period of time, there were cosmetics visible that seemed to have no way of being unlocked. This means that months before the next update, we knew what it was going to be. But before that would come out, we'd be treated to a brief revival of the PvP community. A week after the season started, an adventure called A Hunter's Cry would be released. What made this adventure in specific so special is it sent crews to private servers together, where they were intended to work together to complete a puzzle. However, you could PvP here. So you could boot up the game and immediately start fighting other crews in a few minutes. Of course, this brought back the arena veterans, who would just fight non-stop in these events, ruining it for those who wanted to complete the adventure. And 2 weeks later, when the event ended, the veterans would return to the shadows. As the season progressed, we'd be treated to a few more drip-fed adventures, but nothing notable content-wise. Something to note about Season 7 was that it was around this time that the microtransaction problem was becoming more visible. Despite the delay of the next major game update, the Pirate Emporium would still receive fresh new cosmetics every month. It didn't make it better that 9 times out of 10, the added sets wouldn't fit the pirate aesthetic in the slightest. You've got things like cherry blossoms and crows to full-blown constellations.
Chosen to stand against me? Do you believe you're more deserving than I? Let us suit it to impose your will upon the seas. That you alone know how things should be. You know nothing. I have walked beyond the veil, and it gave me vision. That was only the beginning.
Season 8 introduced the Hourglass of Fate, a new form of PvP on demand. Players could vote on the Hourglass, where they would then opt into the PvP system. You accepted the risks that at any point an enemy ship could appear, requiring you to fight it. Or you could enter the waiting queue to find a ship that was opted in and get the jump on it. Hourglass seemed like an excellent PvP system, but that's only from a glance, because there was a lot wrong with it. For starters, there was next to no matchmaking system. One match you could be up against someone who just bought the game and unknowingly opted in, and the next some day one sweat who's been live on Twitch. On top of that, where the rewards for Hourglass were incredibly grindy. In the arena, the highest title, Legendary Sea Dog, required you to place first place in 240 matches. In Hourglass, to unlock all the cosmetics for both factions, you'd need to win about 4,100 matches. That's insanity. I personally was discouraged from participating in Hourglass, especially since you would sometimes spend upwards of 30 minutes waiting for a match. What made Arena so much more popular was the untamed chaos of placing 5 ships in a single enclosed space. With Hourglass, it was the same old 1v1, with no shocks or twists that Arena offered. Rare had attempted to appease the PvP community with the introduction of Hourglass, but it was too late. So much of the community had already abandoned the game, and those that came back were discouraged by the grind. PvP just wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't fun. Had Rare released this closer to when they had closed Arena, I think it would have gotten a better reception, but it still would have been a bad one because it was so grindy. Season 9 was Sea of Thieves' 5th anniversary, the Big 5, and yet somehow the team managed to roll out an update that only barely beat last year's anniversary. Season 9 was another flop. It introduced the Chest of Fortune, a new item with a very high price tag. The gimmick with this chest was that every season the location where it was found would change. So for Season 9, it was found exclusively in Forts of Fortune, but that changed in Season 10 and 11. It's funny because Rare was trying to get people to fight over the chest and such, but it was pointless. No one cared that there was some new chest. The concept of fighting over valuable loot wouldn't be revolutionized by a single high-value item. Apart from an increase of players participating in Forts of Fortune, nothing changed. It was also around this point that new adventures stopped being released, putting an indefinite halt on the game's story. And guess what? Every single month, without fail, Rare released a new set of paid cosmetics for the Pirate Emporium. Season 9 also brought a set of 3 new Tall Tales themed around the Legend of Monkey Island franchise. And although these Tall Tales were very well made, it saddens me to say that they were received even worse than those of Season 3. They were intended to be a part of Season 10, but delays pushed back the season months upon months, resulting in the development team releasing them as a part of Season 9 instead. But they were drip-fed, so you get a few hours of content every month. Lovely. A majority of the core player base had abandoned the game at this point. Bad update after bad update left a sour taste in people's mouths. Even content creators began to move on from the game. People like Blurbs, Captain Falcor, Fuzzy Bond, and Absolute Pixel either moved on to other games or abandoned their channels altogether. Yet oddly enough, Sea of Thieves' player count didn't reflect this widespread disappointment. It's because although all these seasoned players were leaving the game, new ones were coming in and taking their place. There was so much content in the game for them to play catch up on, they had no reason to complain. They basically didn't even know that there was a content deficit for over half a year. And they didn't know that what happened over the past 2 years had killed so much of the community. Season 10 introduced guilds, a brand new social option to the game. It was intended as an expansion on the captaincy update from the year before, but just like its predecessor, it only brought more levels to grind. It was clear that Rare was aware of this big player base shift and was attempting to cater towards everyone. More social options was something people had been asking for the longest time, and it was finally here. But it was pointless. Nobody came back for more than a week to look at the new stuff, only to be disappointed. To add insult to injury, Season 10 also brought a minor yet very impactful change. Years after their implementation, the Dark Adventurer's sales were finally balanced. The cutout that once gave players an advantage was removed completely. This discouraged players from returning even more, since what had once been an unfair item had evolved into a staple of the game's progression. In complete honesty, there are definitely some cosmetics that give you an advantage in the game. Thinner swords that give you visibility when blocking, Wanda's spyglass which lets you see silhouettes from the distance better, and certain lanterns burn brighter than others. But there's also a laundry list of items that are disadvantageous, like how the Reaper's Heart sniper scope has a red tint which reduces visibility in dark situations. Things like this were merely part of the game that the player base had accepted, and although balancing the sales was an excellent move on Rare's part, they were late. Like 3 years late. And that brings us to Season 11. In complete honesty, Season 11 is a good update. It shows that there's still potential for the game to be a good one, even if not for the same people. The target player base has changed. It's wild to think that 2 seasons ago, we were celebrating the 5th anniversary for Sea of Thieves, and now they were all hyping up the 6th one. The season brought a complete UI overhaul, with everything much more appealing and easier to navigate. The quest system as a whole was revamped, focusing on quality of life features that made the game much more enjoyable. But it also brought a big change. There was a new use to the diving mechanic. When starting off your journey, you could essentially teleport to any island on the map as to save time sailing, but only to get started. From there you couldn't dive unless you wanted to forfeit the loot you had on board. It allowed play sessions to take that much less time and had next to no downside, honestly. The season before also had something I didn't mention, Safer Seas. This was a new game mode introduced nearing the end of the season, allowing players to join a private server. The idea was to give people an empty world to explore and get the hold of, so as not to discourage new players with the immediate threat of PvP if they so pleased. You could still invite people aboard your ship, but you would never encounter another crew when playing on Safer Seas. Of course, progression was limited. Reputation levels were capped, gold income was reduced, and you couldn't reach Pirate Legend playing this game mode. As the years passed, the skill ceiling for the game kept getting higher and higher, to the point where new players were extremely discouraged from participating in PvP because there was so much to get good at. And like so many other live service games out there, the skilled veterans always flocked back when there was an update, leading to the gatekeeping of the game from new players just coming in. But thankfully, with these new systems in place, the game is paving a new place to learn and practice at your own pace. Arena was excellent in doing this, but I can totally relate to those who didn't want to put up with the toxicity and chaos. However, in my opinion, throwing someone into an unruly and toxic environment and leaving them to fend for themselves, learn from their mistakes, and slowly mimic those better than them was the best way to learn the skills necessary to excel at combat. Except that Safer Seas is going the exact opposite direction. Although it encourages players to learn skills of the game in safer environments, it glosses over PvP. There's no way to effectively practice PvP on Safer Seas, which means that once they transfer to High Seas, they'll still be just as discouraged. This change revealed one big thing. The target player base of the game was beginning to shift. Because so many people lost their patience with Rare and quit the game, the developers need to focus on a new group of players, those just coming in. They were essentially trying to fix a leak by pouring in water at a faster rate.
Safer Seas made it clear that Rare had accepted the shift. Their once beloved player base was gone, and nothing was ever going to bring them back.
What about the preview event?
The what?
You know, the preview event. Every year, Rare makes a video talking about their plans for the year.
Oh, yeah, that thing, but it probably doesn't have any actually good Oh my goodness! That's right, baby. You thought this video was gonna end on a bad note, huh? Well, you were dead wrong.
You got two brand new weapons that turn the meta around, new types of cannonballs you can shoot at players, a player hijackable world event letting you pirate Flameheart's Burning Blade and literally have a skeleton army, ziplines, grapple guns, new throwables, more environmental additions, tight roping, a Yamaha F90LB boat motor, the return of 6-ship servers,
And they fixed hit reg? Like, seriously?
Rare love doing this where they seemingly let their game die only to come back swinging with some amazing updates, and this is no exception. Season 12 brought some refreshing new content to the sandbox, and introduced two brand new weapons that shook up the meta. The throwing knives, which let you, well, throw knives at your enemies, but also serving as a melee weapon. You can charge up the knife for a heavy stab, dealing significantly more damage. An interesting gimmick with the throwing knife is that if you miss, the knife will remain lodged in the environment for 15 minutes before despawning. Even if you don't have the throwing knives equipped, you can still pick up the knife and use it. This means that you can technically triple wield weapons by storing knives on your ship, but at the same time you have to be careful not to miss your throws since the enemy can use the knives against you. The throwing knives are definitely the most versatile weapon in the game, letting you confidently use them in close and medium ranges dealing high or low damages. Additionally, they have no reload, so you can dish out damage much faster than a gun. And speaking of guns, the second weapon is the double-barreled pistol. Dealing less damage than the flintlock, the double-barreled pistol gives players the versatility to choose between big or small damage. You can shoot bullets one at a time, or hold down the fire button and unload both barrels of the gun at once. It makes combat situations very different, since you have to decide when to reload in a situation, since it can put you at a significant disadvantage. Personally, I believe that both of these new weapons will definitely have their place in the Sea of Thieves, but that being said, they're more likely than not going to be used as a secondary weapon, since the movement ability of a sword, range of an Eye of Reach, and ladder protection of a blunderbuss are unparalleled by these new weapons. There's also the introduction of a new cannonball type and throwable, the Scattershot, which shoots 4 small cannonballs in a single hit. This is extremely applicable in close quarters cannon fights, like broadsiding a galleon. The small cannonballs deal only tier 1 holes, which will eat through the resources of the opponent's ship should they choose to patch them. They're also amazing for ghost ships, since those are hit-based and a Scattershot counts as 4 hits. And then there's the new throwable, the Bone Collar, which, in my opinion, isn't very good. Unlike the Blunderbomb or Firebomb, the Bone Collar spawns skeletons on demand to aid you in battle. However, these skeletons don't have a lot of health and will despawn after around a minute. And you don't even start off with these. They're supposed to be found only at skeleton ships and forts. Overall, it's a pretty disappointing addition. I just don't really see it in the action of the game because you really have to go out of your way to obtain it. And speaking of going out of your way to obtain things, the Horn of Fair Winds is a new item that shoots a strong gust of wind when sailing, similar to shooting an Ashen Wind Skull or Skull of Siren Song. You can use it to boost your sails, accelerate rowboats and swimming, and even blow players. Wait, not like that. Personally, this item is definitely a problem for solo players and chase mechanics, since you can boost your ship to catch up to players so long as you have the horn and your opponent doesn't. It's also notable mention that ship speeds were balanced, with the sloop and galleon getting a buff to counteract the speed of the brigantine. Harpoons got a huge buff with this update, allowing players to now tightrope along them for easier transportation. This is huge for the boarding meta, since both ship and island harpoons serve as better uses to board an enemy ship now. And lastly, the zipline mechanic introduced in the Legend of Monkey Island Tall Tales was added to islands all across the Sea of Thieves. This doesn't really impact the game's meta, I just think it's really fun to ride down them. But of all these additions, the biggest one has to be the announcement of Sea of Thieves' compatibility with the PlayStation 5. Rejoice! The PlayStation 5 finally has one game. Finally, you can boot up your $500 brick only to get spawn camped by a PC player on Hourglass. I'm really looking forward to messing with all the new players coming into the game. Sea of Thieves has changed so much over the past 6 years. More encounters, world events, storylines, a brand new game mode, even though it was eventually shut down, and who could forget the bold crossovers that expanded the pirate universe. Sea of Thieves in 2024 is nothing like it was in 2018, and that's good. It shows that the developers still love their game and aren't slowing down anytime soon. Despite the slow rate of updates being released in the past year or so, the developers' choice to revisit some of the most foundational concepts the game has to offer ensure that Sea of Thieves will still be kicking for years to come. I'm confident that the game is going the right direction, despite the hiccups that the game has experienced in the years of its existence. Despite the divided player base promising plenty of complaints and controversies down the line, it's important to understand that that's completely okay. The game has stayed intact for over 6 years even with the controversial changes implemented, and some of them were pretty drastic. Sea of Thieves is a game that has stood the testament of time, and we're just getting started, so you better hop on aboard.
And that is the fate of Sea of Thieves. Thanks for watching.
Oh boy, this was quite the undertaking. I just want to take a moment to thank all the amazing people on screen right now. Without their contributions, this video would have never been possible. And since you've made it this far into the video, it's only fair I ask you to subscribe. You can always unsubscribe, but you won't because my content's awesome. I'll catch you guys in the next one.